The grand ballroom of the Silver Ridge Hotel blazed with lamplight on that crisp October evening in 1882. Crystal chandeliers imported all the way from San Francisco cast dancing shadows across the polished wooden floors, while a string quartet played waltzes in the corner. The cream of Montana Territory society had gathered for the annual Cattlemen's Association ball, but every unmarried woman in attendance had her eyes fixed on one man. James Thornhill stood near the punch table, his broad shoulders filling out his tailored black suit coat with an ease that spoke of both prosperity and physical labor. At 34, he cut an imposing figure, 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle, with sun-weathered skin that betrayed his years working cattle under the vast Montana sky. His dark hair, touched with premature silver at the temples, was neatly combed back, and his gray eyes held an intelligence that made him seem to see straight through the social pretenses surrounding him. "Mr. Thornhill, you simply must try the imported chocolates," cooed Victoria Langston, daughter of Circuit Judge Ezekiel Langston. She glided toward him in a dress of emerald silk that probably cost more than most homesteaders earned in a year. Her blonde ringlets bounced as she batted her eyelashes with practiced precision. "Father had them brought in specially from Chicago for tonight." James accepted the chocolate with a polite nod. "That's mighty kind of your father, Miss Langston." Before Victoria could monopolize his attention further, another young woman materialized at his elbow. Margaret Sutherland, daughter of Colonel Robert Sutherland, who commanded Fort Harrison, wore a gown of deep burgundy that matched her auburn hair. "Mr. Thornhill, I was hoping you might honor me with a dance. Papa says you have the finest herd of Herefords in 3 territories." "Your papa's too generous with his praise, Miss Sutherland," James replied, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The evening continued in this fashion. Everywhere James turned, another eligible daughter appeared, daughters of bankers, railroad executives, mining magnates, and military officers, each one prettier than the last, each one dressed in finery that spoke of old money and Eastern refinement. They complimented his ranch, praised his business acumen, and hinted broadly at their skills in managing a wealthy household. James Thornhill's success was no secret in Silver Ridge. He had arrived in Montana 12 years earlier, with nothing but a good horse, a keener eye for cattle than most men possessed, and a willingness to work from dawn until long after dark. His rocking tea ranch now sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime grazing land along the Yellowstone River, with over 3,000 head of cattle bearing his brand. He employed 20 cowboys year-round, owned shares in the town bank and the lumber mill, and had a reputation for honest dealing that made him wealthy beyond what most men in the territory could imagine. But wealth had brought complications James never anticipated. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, setting down his punch glass. "I need some air." He stepped through the French doors onto the hotel's second-floor balcony, grateful for the cool October breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant pines. The street below was quiet. Most of Silver Ridge's 4,000 residents either at the ball or already turned in for the night. Gas lamps flickered along Main Street, illuminating the false-fronted buildings that lined both sides: the general store, the saddle shop, 2 saloons, the bank, and the newly completed courthouse where Judge Langston presided. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" James turned to find his foreman and closest friend, Thomas Bear McAllister, leaning against the balcony railing. Bear was a massive man who had earned his nickname honestly, 6 feet 5 inches and built like a grizzly with a beard to match. He wore his Sunday best, which on Bear meant clean dungarees and a shirt without any visible patches. "It's like being stalked by a pack of wolves in silk dresses," James said, managing a wry smile. Bear chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. "Pretty wolves, though. That Sutherland girl's got eyes like a mountain lake. Pretty on the outside, maybe. But every one of them looks at me and sees dollar signs, not a man." James pulled out a cigar, then thought better of it and tucked it back in his pocket. "They want the ranch, the status, the security. Not one of them has asked me about anything that matters. What I think about, what I care about, what kind of man I am beyond my bank account." "You could do worse than marrying for practical reasons," Bear pointed out. "Half the marriages out here start that way. Man needs a wife, woman needs security. They make it work. My parents didn't marry that way." James's voice grew quiet. "My pa was a dirt-poor farmer in Ohio. My ma was the daughter of the town minister. Her family disowned her when she married Pa, said he'd never amount to anything. But they loved each other, Bear. Really loved each other. Even when we had nothing, even when crops failed and we went hungry, they had something real. That's what I want." Bear was silent for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. That kind of love's rare as hen's teeth, especially out here. I know. Maybe I'm chasing something that doesn't exist. James straightened, rolling the tension from his shoulders. But I'll be damned if I'll marry some society girl who thinks manual labor is beneath her and wouldn't know how to survive a hard winter if her life depended on it. The women in there have never struggled, never gone without, never had to be strong when everything's falling apart. How can you really know someone's character until you've seen them tested? The sound of carriages arriving drew their attention to the street below. More latecomers to the ball, their fine horses and polished carriages announcing their status. James watched them with a mixture of fascination and resignation. This was his world now, whether he liked it or not. Success had opened doors, but also trapped him in expectations he never sought. "We should head back in," Bear said. "Folks'll talk if you spend the whole evening hiding on the balcony." "Let them talk. I'm about ready to head home anyway." But as James turned toward the doors, a commotion erupted inside the ballroom. Raised voices, the rustle of skirts, and then Judge Langston's booming baritone. "This is a private event. You have no business here." James pushed back through the French doors to find a small crowd gathered near the entrance. Judge Langston, red-faced and indignant, blocked the doorway while his daughter Victoria stood beside him with a scandalized expression. Beyond them, James could make out a slender figure in a simple grey dress, severely plain compared to the finery surrounding her. "I'm just delivering the linens, Judge Langston," a woman's voice said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson at the hotel asked me to bring them up from the laundry. I'll be out of your way in just a moment." "The service entrance is around back where it belongs," the judge snapped. "We don't need your kind mingling with decent folk." James found himself moving forward before he consciously decided to. The crowd parted as he approached, and for the first time, he got a clear look at the woman causing such a stir. She was perhaps 28 or 29, with dark, honey-colored hair pulled back in a simple bun that revealed a face of quiet beauty, the kind that didn't announce itself but revealed itself slowly. Her dress was faded and carefully mended, her hands work-roughened, her posture straight despite the obvious exhaustion in her dark blue eyes. She carried a basket of pressed linens and kept her gaze lowered, clearly trying to make herself as invisible as possible. James recognized her, though he'd never spoken to her directly. Catherine Brennan, widow of Tom Brennan, a homesteader who'd claimed land about 15 miles outside town. Tom had died last February during a brutal cold snap, caught in a blizzard while checking on his livestock. They'd found his body 3 days later, frozen solid, just 200 yards from his cabin. Catherine had been left with 2 young children and a failing homestead. "Is there a problem here?" James asked, his voice carrying enough authority to silence the murmuring crowd. Judge Langston turned, his expression shifting from indignation to ingratiating warmth in an instant. "Mr. Thornhill, no problem at all, just a small matter of inappropriate access. I was merely explaining to Mrs. Brennan that she should deliver the linens you're expecting through the back entrance in the dark and the cold, rather than through the well-lit front door," James finished. "Seems unnecessarily harsh, Judge, especially for a woman just trying to do her job." The judge's face reddened further. "Well, that is, there are proprieties to consider, Mr. Thornhill. The hotel staff knows to use the service areas. Mrs. Brennan isn't hotel staff. She runs an independent laundry service." James had made it his business to know something about most people in the territory, at least those who worked hard and dealt honestly. "She does excellent work from what I hear." He turned to Catherine, who had finally lifted her eyes to meet his. In that brief moment of connection, James saw something that arrested him completely. Not calculation, not greed, not social maneuvering. He saw exhaustion, yes, but also dignity, strength, and a carefully guarded wariness that spoke of too many disappointments and too many hard lessons learned. "Ma'am, where do these linens need to go?" he asked gently. "The manager's office, sir," Catherine said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson ordered them for the guest rooms. I'll walk you there." "Bear?" James gestured to his foreman, who immediately stepped forward to take the heavy basket from Catherine's arms. She started to protest, but Bear had already relieved her of the burden with surprising gentleness for such a large man. "Mr. Thornhill, surely you don't need to trouble yourself," Judge Langston sputtered. "We have staff for—" "No trouble at all, Judge. Enjoy your evening." James offered his arm to Catherine. She hesitated, clearly uncertain about accepting such a gesture from a man so far above her social station, but after a moment she placed her hand lightly on his forearm and James felt an unexpected jolt at the contact, even through layers of fabric. They walked through the ballroom in silence, every eye following them. James could hear the whispers starting already. The scandalous sight of James Thornhill, the most eligible bachelor in Montana territory, escorting a poor widow in a threadbare dress through a ball attended by the daughters of the most powerful families in the region. Let them whisper, James thought. For the first time in months, he felt like he was doing something that actually mattered. The manager's office was located down a narrow hallway off the main lobby. Bear deposited the basket of linens on the desk, while James held the door for Catherine. The relative quiet of the small room was a relief after the oppressive atmosphere of the ballroom. "Thank you, Mr. Thornhill," Catherine said, her voice still quiet, but less guarded now that they were away from the judgmental crowd. "You didn't need to do that. I'm used to certain reactions from folks." "You shouldn't have to be," James said. "Judge Langston had no call to speak to you that way." Catherine's lips curved in a sad, knowing smile. "The judge and his kind don't much care for reminders that people like me exist. We make them uncomfortable, proof that not everyone prospers in this territory, that hard work and good intentions aren't always enough." There was no bitterness in her words, just a weary acceptance that James found more troubling than anger would have been. He studied her more carefully now, seeing details he'd missed in the ballroom. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her dress, though clean and carefully pressed, was so worn that the fabric had gone thin at the elbows and hem. Her shoes, he could see them now beneath the skirt, were men's boots, several sizes too large, probably her late husband's. "How are you managing?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too direct. But Catherine didn't seem offended. "We're managing," she said simply. "My son Samuel is 9, my daughter Emma is 6. They're good children, healthy and strong. We have a roof over our heads and food on the table. That's more than some can say." "But the homestead," James began, "is more than I can handle alone, yes." Catherine's chin lifted slightly, that quiet pride showing through. "Tom tried his best, but the land he claimed is rocky, and the water situation is difficult. Without him to work it, I can't make a go of farming. So I take in laundry, do mending, whatever work I can find in town. It keeps us fed." Bear cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you'll excuse me, I should get back to the ball. Boss, I'll bring the carriage around front when you're ready to head home." After Bear left, an awkward silence settled between them. James found himself wanting to know more about this woman, but uncertain how to proceed without seeming intrusive or worse, like the wealthy patrons who treated the poor as objects of curiosity. "Your husband," he finally said. "Tom Brennan. I knew him a little. He bought a bull calf from me once, couple years back. Drove a hard but fair bargain." Catherine's expression softened with memory. "That was Tom. He believed if you worked hard enough and dealt square with people, you could make something of yourself out here. He was from Pennsylvania originally, came west after the war. Lost everything in the panic of '73, decided to start fresh in Montana. And you?" "I'm from Ohio, small town outside Cincinnati. My father was a shopkeeper." She paused, weighing whether to continue. "Tom and I married young. I was 17, he was 22. My parents approved because Tom seemed steady, ambitious. We had 6 good years together before—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. James knew the brutal facts. Tom Brennan caught in a blizzard, dead at 34, leaving his widow and 2 children with almost nothing. "The night he died," Catherine continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "he'd gone out to check on the milk cow. She was about to calve and he was worried about her in the cold. He told me he'd be back in 20 minutes. When he wasn't back in an hour, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't leave the children to search for him. The storm was so fierce, the snow so thick, you couldn't see 2 feet in front of your face." Her hands twisted together and James saw they were trembling slightly. "I kept the children warm, kept the fire going, kept waiting. 3 days, Mr. Thornhill. 3 days before the storm broke enough for neighbors to come check on us. They found Tom just beyond the barn. He'd gotten turned around in the whiteout, walked in the wrong direction. If he'd gone 20 feet to the left instead of the right, he'd have found the cabin." James felt his chest tighten. He'd seen men die from exposure before. It was one of the harsh realities of Montana winters. But hearing Catherine's quiet recounting of those 3 days of waiting, hoping, knowing deep down that hope was fading with each passing hour, struck him more deeply than he expected. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "That's a hell of a thing for anyone to endure." "Thank you." Catherine straightened, visibly pushing the memory back down. "But that was 8 months ago." Grief doesn't pay the bills or feed the children. I've learned to focus on what needs doing next, not on what can't be changed. That pragmatic resilience impressed James more than any amount of beauty or social grace ever could. Here was a woman who'd faced genuine hardship, not the manufactured crises of society ladies upset about the wrong dress arriving for a ball, and had simply rolled up her sleeves and done what needed doing. Mrs. Brennan, if you don't mind my asking, what are your plans? For the homestead, I mean. Can you hold on to it? Catherine shook her head. The bank holds the note. I'm 3 months behind on payments. Mr. Cartwright at the bank has been patient, but his patience has limits. Come December, if I can't catch up the arrears, he'll foreclose. Truth is, even if I could keep up the payments, I couldn't work the land properly. I've been thinking about selling if I can find a buyer, but the land isn't worth much and everyone knows I'm desperate. An idea began forming in James's mind, but before he could voice it, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Victoria Langston appeared in the doorway, her pretty face set in lines of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Thornhill, there you are. We were worried you'd taken ill. Her gaze flicked to Catherine with barely concealed disdain. I'm sure your errand is complete. Papa is about to give his speech and everyone's asking for you. I'll be along shortly, Miss Langston. Victoria hesitated, clearly expecting James to abandon Catherine immediately and escort her back to the ballroom. When he didn't move, her expression hardened. Very well. I'll tell Papa you're detained. She swept out, her silk skirts rustling with indignation. Catherine had already picked up her empty basket. I should go. I've taken up enough of your evening, and I have a long walk back home. How long? About an hour and a half, maybe 2 in the dark. You walked here 15 miles? I have a wagon, but the axle's cracked and I can't afford to repair it yet. Walking's free. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. James made a decision. Bear's bringing my carriage around. We'll take you home. Mr. Thornhill, that's not necessary. It's full dark, Mrs. Brennan, and there are wolves in these hills, not to mention the occasional drifter who might not have good intentions toward a woman walking alone. I'm heading in that direction anyway. This last part wasn't strictly true. The Rocking T was north of town while the Brennan homestead was west, but James wasn't about to let her walk home alone at night. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but practicality won out. Thank you, that's very kind. They walked back through the lobby, bypassing the ballroom entirely. James could feel eyes watching them from the windows above, and knew that by morning, everyone in Silver Ridge would be talking about how he'd abandoned the cattleman's ball to drive a poor widow home. Let them talk. Bear had the carriage waiting out front, a well-sprung surrey with a leather top and cushioned seats, another symbol of James's prosperity. He helped Catherine up, noting how light she was, how carefully she arranged herself on the seat as though afraid of damaging the fine upholstery with her worn dress. The ride west took them through the heart of Silver Ridge, then out into open country where the Montana night spread vast and star-filled above them. Bear drove while James sat beside Catherine in the back, both of them wrapped in the heavy blankets he kept stored under the seats. Tell me about your children, James said after a while. Catherine's face transformed when she spoke about Samuel and Emma. The exhaustion and weariness faded, replaced by unmistakable love and pride. Samuel was bright as a whip, she said, always asking questions and reading everything he could get his hands on. Emma was quieter but had her father's gentle nature and a gift with animals. Both children did chores without complaining, understood that times were hard, tried to make things easier for their mother however they could. Samuel wants to be a lawyer, Catherine said with a soft laugh. He's been reading Tom's old law books. Tom studied law for a year before money ran out. Samuel says he's going to make enough money someday to buy his mama a big house in town so she never has to work again. And Emma? Emma wants to be a veterinarian. She's constantly bringing home injured animals, birds with broken wings, rabbits with hurt legs. She nurses them back to health in a box by the stove. Catherine's smile faded slightly. They're good dreams, but dreams don't pay for schooling. The little education they're getting now is all they're likely to get. The Brennan homestead appeared in the distance, a small cabin with a lean-to barn and a few outbuildings, all looking worse for wear in the moonlight. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone had kept the fire going. As they pulled into the yard, the cabin door burst open and 2 small figures came running out. "Mama! Mama's home!" Emma reached the carriage first, a tiny girl with her mother's dark hair and eyes. Samuel was right behind her, taller and more serious-looking, his father's features emerging in his 9-year-old face. Both children pulled up short when they saw the fine carriage and the 2 men with their mother. "It's all right," Catherine assured them, climbing down. "These are friends. They gave me a ride home. Samuel, Emma, this is Mr. Thornhill and Mr. McAllister. Pleased to meet you, ma'am, sir," Samuel said with careful politeness. Emma just stared with wide eyes. James found himself unexpectedly moved by the scene. These two children who'd lost their father, watching their mother work herself to exhaustion to keep them fed, still managing to be polite and well-behaved. No tantrums, no complaints, just quiet acceptance of circumstances they were too young to fully understand. "Thank you again, Mr. Thornhill," Catherine said. "You've been more than kind." James nodded, but as he watched her gather her children and head toward the cabin, he found himself reluctant to leave. Something about this place, this woman, these children, it felt more real, more honest than anything he'd experienced in months. "Boss," Bear said quietly from the driver's seat. "We should head back." "Yeah," James said, but he was already thinking about reasons to return. The gossip reached fever pitch by Monday morning. James learned this when he rode into Silver Ridge 3 days after the ball to conduct business at the bank. Even before he dismounted in front of the First National Bank building, he could feel eyes on him. Shopkeepers pausing in their doorways, ladies stopping their conversations to stare, men exchanging knowing looks. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was no better. Milton Cartwright, the bank president, greeted James with unusual coolness as he ushered him into his private office. Cartwright was a thin man in his 50s, always impeccably dressed, with wire-rimmed spectacles that magnified his pale blue eyes. "Mr. Thornhill, good to see you," Cartwright said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I trust you're here about the quarterly interest on your business loan." "That, and I wanted to discuss a land matter." James settled into the chair across from Cartwright's massive oak desk. "The Brennan homestead west of town. I understand Mrs. Brennan is behind on payments." Cartwright's expression became guarded. "That's correct. 3 months in arrears. The note comes due in full on December 1st. If she can't pay, we'll have to foreclose." "What if I bought the note from the bank? Or better yet, what if I bought the property directly from Mrs. Brennan?" "I see." Cartwright leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Thornhill, I feel obligated to speak plainly. There's been considerable talk since Saturday night. Your association with Mrs. Brennan has raised eyebrows throughout Silver Ridge." "My association? I gave a woman a ride home. Hardly scandalous. You abandoned the social event of the season, where every prominent family had gathered specifically to see you, to escort a woman of questionable circumstances. You must understand how this appears." James felt his temper rising but kept his voice level. "Questionable circumstances. Mrs. Brennan is a widow trying to provide for her children. There's nothing questionable about honest work. Perhaps not. But there are concerns about her character." Cartwright removed his spectacles and polished them with a handkerchief, not meeting James's eyes. "I've heard from several sources that Mrs. Brennan may have been partially responsible for her husband's death. There are suggestions she sent him out in that blizzard deliberately, knowing the danger." "That's ridiculous." James's voice hardened. "Who's spreading such lies?" "I'm not at liberty to say. But the concerns are substantial enough that I must advise you, as a valued client and pillar of this community, to reconsider any business dealings with the woman. Your reputation, Mr. Thornhill." "My reputation can survive just fine. Thank you." James stood abruptly. "Now, are you willing to discuss the Brennan property or not?" Cartwright replaced his spectacles with deliberate slowness. "I'm afraid the bank has decided to retain the property after foreclosure. We have another buyer interested, someone prepared to pay above market value. Given the circumstances, we've already accepted their offer, contingent on foreclosure." "Who's the buyer?" "I'm not at liberty to reveal that information until the sale is complete." James recognized a stone wall when he hit one. He conducted his other banking business with terse efficiency and left, his mind working through what he'd just learned. Someone with money and influence was actively working against Catherine Brennan, and now apparently against him for showing her kindness. His next stop was the general store, where he needed to order supplies for the ranch. Sarah Mitchell, the shopkeeper's wife, normally greeted him with warm friendliness. Today she was coldly polite. "Mr. Thornhill, what can we get for you?" As James rattled off his supply list, he noticed Sarah's daughter Clara lingering near the fabric counter, shooting furtive glances his direction. Clara was 16, still young enough to gossip without subtlety. "Is it true, Mr. Thornhill?" Clara blurted out, ignoring her mother's sharp look. "Did you really leave the ball with that Brennan woman? Victoria Langston said you were holding her hand and everything." "Clara, that's enough," Sarah snapped. but her eyes were hungry for James's response. "I gave Mrs. Brennan a ride home," James said evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less." "But why would you—" Clara began, then yelped as her mother pinched her arm. James collected his supplies and left, but the encounter confirmed what he'd suspected. The story had grown with each retelling, transforming a simple act of decency into something scandalous. By now, half the town probably believed he was having an affair with Catherine Brennan. His final stop was the Silver Ridge Gazette, where he placed his usual advertisement for ranch hands. Marcus Webb, the newspaper's editor and publisher, was a sharp-eyed man in his 40s who'd worked for major papers back east before seeking his fortune in Montana. "Mr. Thornhill," Webb said, his smile knowing. "I was hoping you'd stop by. I'm running a story about the Cattleman's Ball, social event of the year and all that. Care to comment on your early departure?" "Not particularly." "Come now, surely you have something to say. The town's most eligible bachelor spurning the affections of prominent young ladies to consort with. Choose your next words carefully, Webb." The editor held up his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes gleamed with the scent of a good story. "No offense intended, but you must admit it's unusual behavior. Judge Langston called your actions deeply disrespectful to decent society. Colonel Sutherland suggested your judgment might be impaired, and several ladies have expressed concern that you might be susceptible to manipulation by opportunistic women." James leaned across the desk, keeping his voice quiet but letting steel show through. "Print whatever you want about me, Webb, but if I see one word questioning Mrs. Brennan's character or motives, we're going to have a serious problem. Are we clear?" Webb swallowed hard but managed a nod. James left the newspaper office knowing he'd made an enemy. Webb was too much of a newsman to resist a juicy story, threats or no threats. The ride back to the rocking T gave James time to think. The coordinated response was no accident. Someone was orchestrating this campaign against both him and Catherine. The timing was too perfect, the messaging too consistent. Judge Langston's public criticism, Cartwright's mysterious buyer, the gossip spreading through town like wildfire, it all pointed to a deliberate effort to isolate Catherine and pressure James to fall back in line with societal expectations. Bear was waiting when James rode into the ranch yard. One look at his foreman's face told him there was more trouble brewing. "What now?" James asked, dismounting. "We had visitors this morning. Judge Langston and Colonel Sutherland, along with Henry Blackwood from the Cattlemen's Association." James groaned. Blackwood owned the second largest ranch in the territory and had always resented James's rapid success. "What did they want?" "To talk sense into you," they said. "I told them you were in town, but they left a message." Bear pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, said they wanted you to have this before you made any more mistakes. James unfolded the paper. It was written in Judge Langston's precise handwriting. "Mr. Thornhill, we write as concerned friends and fellow businessmen. Your actions at Saturday's ball have caused considerable distress within our community's most respected families. More troubling is your continued association with a woman of dubious morals whose circumstances suggest poor judgment at best, calculated manipulation at worst. Mrs. Catherine Brennan is known to be in desperate financial straits. It strains credulity to believe her sudden claim on your attention is anything but mercenary in nature. A woman of her station seeking connection with a man of your wealth is the oldest scheme in existence. For your own protection and the good of Silver Ridge society, we strongly urge you to cease all contact with Mrs. Brennan. The damage to your reputation and business interests could be substantial and lasting. Furthermore, we wish to inform you that several families are reconsidering their business relationships with the Rocking T. Colonel Sutherland has indicated he will source beef elsewhere for Fort Harrison. Judge Langston has concerns about future legal matters involving your holdings, and the Cattlemen's Association may need to reconsider your membership if you persist in behavior unbefitting a respected rancher. We trust you will see reason and conduct yourself appropriately henceforth. Yours in fellowship, Judge Ezekiel Langston, Colonel Robert Sutherland, Henry Blackwood. James read the letter twice, his anger building with each word. They were threatening him, politely but unmistakably. Fall in line or face economic and social consequences. The Fort Harrison contract alone was worth thousands of dollars annually. "What are you going to do, boss?" Bear asked quietly. James folded the letter and tucked it in his pocket. "I'm going to do exactly what they're trying to prevent me from doing. Tomorrow morning, we're riding out to the Brennan place. I'm going to make Mrs. Brennan an offer on her land. They'll come after you hard if you do that. Let them." James's jaw set with stubborn determination. "I didn't build the rocking T by backing down from bullies, and I'm not starting now. Besides, there's something they don't understand." "What's that?" "I don't give a damn what they think." That evening, James sat in his study in the main ranch house, a solid two-story building he'd constructed 3 years earlier when success finally allowed him to build something permanent. The house was comfortable but not ostentatious, filled with practical furniture and books, rather than the fancy trappings other wealthy men favored. He pulled out the letter again, studying it more carefully. The threats were real, but something else bothered him. The letter's tone suggested they believed Catherine was manipulating him, playing on his sympathies to secure financial help. But James had seen genuine surprise and discomfort in Catherine's face when he'd offered her the ride home. She hadn't sought him out, hadn't angled for his attention, hadn't done anything remotely calculating. No, the real manipulation was coming from Langston and his allies. They were trying to control James, to force him back into the role they'd assigned him, wealthy bachelor who would eventually choose a suitable bride from among their daughters, cementing alliances and preserving their social order. Well, James Thornhill had never been good at playing assigned roles. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began making calculations. If he bought the Brennan homestead, he could combine it with rocking T grazing land, creating a more efficient operation. The homestead itself was modest, but the land had water access that could prove valuable. It was a sound business decision, regardless of any other considerations. But James was honest enough with himself to admit that business wasn't his primary motivation. He'd spent one evening with Catherine Brennan and her children, barely a few hours total, but something about them had lodged in his chest like a splinter. Their quiet dignity, their resilience, their refusal to be broken by circumstances that would have destroyed lesser people. It had shown him something he'd been missing in his own life: authenticity, connection, purpose beyond mere accumulation. The society women who pursued him were lovely on the surface, but hollow beneath. Catherine Brennan was the opposite. Plain on the surface, perhaps, but solid all the way through, like good oak versus painted pine. A knock on the study door interrupted his thoughts. Bear entered, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. "Figured you could use this," Bear said, handing James a glass. "Thanks." James took a long sip, savoring the burn. "You think I'm being a fool?" Bear considered the question seriously. "I think you're doing what you believe is right. Consequences be damned. That's either brave or foolish, depending on how things turn out. Helpful. You want helpful? Here's helpful. Mrs. Brennan seems like a good woman in a bad situation. Helping her is the decent thing to do. But those folks who signed that letter aren't going to back down easy. They've got money, power, and they're used to getting their way. If you cross them, they'll make life hard. I can handle hard." "I know you can, boss. Just want to make sure you've thought it through." Bear paused. "There's something else you should consider." "What?" "Mrs. Brennan herself. If she's got any sense, and she strikes me as plenty smart, she knows that accepting help from you is going to paint a target on her back even bigger than the one she already has. She might refuse your help just to avoid making things worse." James hadn't considered that angle. Bear was right. Catherine had already shown she valued her independence and dignity. She might see his offer as charity rather than business, or worse, as confirmation of what the gossips were saying about her manipulating him. "Then I'll have to make sure she understands it's a fair business proposition," James said. "I'll pay market value for the land, help her relocate somewhere she can make a fresh start, nothing charitable about it. And if she still says no, then I'll respect her decision." James drained his whiskey glass. "But I'm at least going to make the offer. She deserves that much. A real choice, not just the slow slide into foreclosure and destitution." Bear nodded approvingly. "Now that's the boss I know. When do we ride out?" "First light tomorrow. And Bear, bring your rifle. I have a feeling we're going to be watched." James and Bear left the rocking T just after dawn, the October morning crisp and clear. Frost silvered the grass in the shadowed valleys, and their breath misted in the cold air. True to Bear's prediction, they spotted 2 riders on a distant ridge about an hour into their journey, too far to identify but close enough to make their surveillance obvious. "Blackwood's men, you reckon?" Bear asked, one hand resting casually on his rifle. "Probably. They want to know where I'm going, what I'm doing." James kept his horse at a steady walk. "Let them watch. I've got nothing to hide." The Brennan homestead looked even more run-down in daylight than it had in the moonlight. The cabin's roof sagged in one corner, several fence posts had fallen over, and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges. but smoke rose from the chimney, and James could hear children's voices from behind the cabin. Catherine emerged from the cabin as they rode into the yard, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. She froze when she recognized James, surprise and wariness crossing her face in quick succession. "Mr. Thornhill, Mr. McAllister." She glanced past them toward the distant ridge where the watchers sat. "This is unexpected." James dismounted, removing his hat. "Mrs. Brennan, I apologize for the unannounced visit, but I have a business proposition I'd like to discuss with you. Might we talk inside?" Catherine hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity and caution. Finally, she nodded. "Emma, Samuel, keep working on your lessons. I'll be inside if you need me." The cabin's interior was spotlessly clean but painfully sparse. A table with mismatched chairs, a pot-belly stove that provided heat and cooking surface, 2 narrow beds in one corner separated by a hanging blanket for privacy, and a few shelves holding dishes, supplies, and a small collection of books. Everything worn but cared for, nothing wasted. "Please, sit," Catherine gestured to the chairs. "I can make coffee if you'd like." "That would be welcome, thank you." While Catherine prepared coffee on the stove, James organized his thoughts. This conversation would require delicacy. He needed to present his offer as business, not charity, while also being honest about the complications his attention had created for her. Catherine poured 3 tin cups of coffee and sat across from James, her posture straight and composed, despite the obvious questions in her eyes. Bear stood near the door, keeping watch through the window. "Mrs. Brennan, I'll come straight to the point," James began. "I understand the bank plans to foreclose on your property in December. I'd like to buy the homestead from you before that happens, pay off your debt and give you enough additional funds to relocate wherever you choose and start fresh." Catherine's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly around her coffee cup. "That's very generous, Mr. Thornhill, but I couldn't possibly accept. You've already done more than enough by giving me a ride home. I won't be indebted to you further. It's not generosity, it's business. The land borders my southern grazing range. Owning it would give me better water access and consolidate my holdings. I'm prepared to pay fair market value." "Fair market value for rocky land with a failing well and dilapidated buildings?" Catherine shook her head. "Mr. Thornhill, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not naive. This is charity dressed up as business, and I can't accept it." James had expected resistance, but her directness still caught him off guard. "It's not entirely charity," he admitted. "The land does have value to me, but you're right that I'm offering more than a stranger might. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise." "Then why?" Catherine asked quietly. "You don't know me, Mr. Thornhill. We've spoken once for less than an hour. Why would you risk your reputation and standing in the community to help me? Have you heard the talk in town?" "I've heard." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Mrs. Henderson at the hotel was kind enough to warn me yesterday. Apparently I'm a scheming seductress who manipulated you into compromising yourself at the ball. The charitable interpretation is that I'm a desperate opportunist. The less charitable suggests I'm, well, the sort of woman who would trade favors for security." James felt anger rise at the cruelty of it. "I'm sorry, that's my fault. If I'd thought about the consequences—" "You'd have left me to walk home alone in the dark," Catherine interrupted. "Would that have been the better choice, Mr. Thornhill? Should you have chosen propriety over basic human decency?" "No, but then don't apologize for doing the right thing. The people spreading those rumors would find something to criticize regardless. When you're poor in a town full of wealth, everything you do is suspect." She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "But that's precisely why I can't accept your offer. It would confirm every terrible thing they're saying about me, and worse, it would damage you further. I don't care what they say about me." "Perhaps you should." Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. "You've built something impressive, Mr. Thornhill. The rocking tea, your reputation, your standing in the community. Those things took years of hard work. I won't be the reason you lose them. And what about you?" James leaned forward, his intensity making Catherine meet his eyes. "What happens when the bank forecloses? Where will you and your children go? What will you do?" "We'll manage. I always do." But there was uncertainty beneath the brave words, a flicker of fear she couldn't quite hide. "Will you?" James pressed. "Without land, without a home, with 2 children to feed. Mrs. Brennan, Catherine, I've seen how hard you work. I saw your hands, your exhaustion, your son's oversized boots because you can't afford proper shoes for yourself. You're drowning, and you're too proud to grab the rope someone's throwing you." Catherine's composure cracked slightly. "And what do you think happens if I grab that rope, Mr. Thornhill? The judge, the colonel, All those powerful men who are already against me. They'll destroy you for helping me. They'll ruin your business, isolate you socially, make you regret ever showing me kindness. I won't have that on my conscience. Let me worry about my own conscience. No. Catherine stood abruptly, turning away to hide the tears threatening to spill. You don't understand what it's like to be truly vulnerable. To know that one wrong move, one bad month, one piece of bad luck could mean your children go hungry. To lie awake at night counting pennies and wondering which bill to pay and which to let slide. To see your babies wearing clothes you've mended so many times, there's more patch than original fabric. Her voice broke and James saw her shoulders shake with suppressed emotion. I've swallowed my pride more times than I can count, Mr. Thornhill. I've accepted help from neighbors who could barely spare it. I've worked jobs that left my hands bleeding. I've done things I never imagined I'd have to do just to survive. But this? Accepting money from a wealthy man who barely knows me. Money that will ruin his reputation and confirm every nasty rumor about me. That's a line I won't cross. I have to be able to look at myself in the mirror. I have to be able to look my children in the eye. James stood and moved closer but didn't touch her. What if it wasn't just a business transaction? What if there was another way? Catherine turned, wiping her eyes roughly. What do you mean? Marry me. The words hung in the air between them. Bear's head snapped around from the window, his expression shocked. Catherine simply stared, her face pale. Marry you, she repeated faintly. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Now that James had said it, the rightness of the idea solidified. It solves both our problems. You get security for yourself and your children. I get what I actually want, a real partnership with someone genuine, not a calculated alliance with some society woman who sees me as a prize to be won. Mr. Thornhill, this is insane. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're strong, capable, honest, and you love your children more than anything. I know you'd rather struggle alone than compromise your principles. I know you're exactly the kind of person I want as a partner. James spoke quickly, following the logic as it formed. Think about it practically. Marriage makes everything legitimate. No more scandal about me helping you. A man has every right to provide for his wife and her children. Your kids get security, education, a future. And I get a wife I respect rather than one who pretends to love me for my money, while actually just loving the money. But you don't love me? Catherine's voice was barely audible. And I don't love you. No. But we could build something real together. Start with honesty and respect, see where it leads. That's more than most marriages out here have. James softened his tone. Catherine, I'm not expecting romance. I'm proposing a partnership, a practical arrangement that benefits both of us. You'd have your own room in the ranch house, complete independence, no expectations beyond being a wife in name, unless and until you decided otherwise. Catherine sank back into her chair, looking stunned. This is madness. People will say I trapped you. People are already saying worse about both of us. At least this way we'd be happy while they gossip. Would we? Catherine looked up at him, vulnerability showing through her carefully maintained composure. Would we really be happy, Mr. Thornhill? Or would you grow to resent me? Would your friends and business associates punish you for choosing wrong? Would we spend years making each other miserable because we rushed into something neither of us was ready for? James pulled out a chair and sat across from her again, close enough that their knees almost touched. I can't predict the future, Catherine. Maybe it would be a mistake, but I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Spending my life married to one of those society women, pretending to be something I'm not, pretending my wife cares about me as a person rather than a bank account, that would definitely make me miserable. At least with you, I'd be starting from a place of honesty. Your foreman thinks you've lost your mind, Catherine observed, glancing at Bear, who was indeed staring at James like he'd grown a second head. My foreman will get used to the idea, James said. The question is, will you even consider it? Catherine was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching James's face for something, doubt perhaps, or hidden motives, or signs of the madness this entire conversation suggested. Finally, she spoke. I need time to think. This is too important, too permanent to decide in one morning based on a conversation. Of course, take whatever time you need, and I need to understand something first. Catherine's voice grew firmer. Why me, Mr. Thornhill? Really, why? Not the practical reasons, not the business logic. Why would a man like you, wealthy, successful, admired, choose to tie himself to a poor widow with 2 children and a reputation that's about to get shredded? There are easier ways to solve your bachelor problem. James met her eyes steadily. Because when I sat in that ballroom surrounded by 100 beautiful women, I felt completely alone. When I spent one evening with you, I felt like I'd finally met someone real. Because your children have better manners and more character than the spoiled daughters of colonels and judges. Because you know what truly matters and what doesn't. Because I'd rather spend my life with someone genuine who respects me than someone perfect who just wants what I can give them. He paused, then added quietly, and because I have a feeling that if I let you slip away without trying, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Catherine's eyes glistened with fresh tears, but she blinked them back. I need 3 days. That's when the next supply wagon goes to town. I'll send my answer with the driver. Fair enough. James stood, Bear moving immediately to join him. Whatever you decide, Catherine, I want you to know you're stronger than you think. You're going to be fine, with or without my help. Thank you, Catherine whispered, for everything, for treating me like a person instead of a problem or a scandal. At the door, James turned back. One more thing. Those 2 riders on the ridge have been watching us since we arrived. Blackwood's men, most likely, or maybe the judges. They'll report back that I spent time here. The gossip will get worse before it gets better. If you say no, I want you to know I don't blame you. You'd be making the smart choice. And if I say yes, then we face whatever comes together. After James and Bear rode away, Catherine stood in her doorway watching until they disappeared over the rise. The 2 watchers on the distant ridge remained visible for a few minutes longer before they too departed, no doubt racing to spread word of this latest development. Samuel emerged from behind the cabin, Emma close behind. Both children had clearly been listening through the wall. "Mama, was that man asking you to marry him?" Emma asked, her young face solemn. Catherine knelt down, gathering both children close. "Yes, sweetheart, he was." "Are you going to say yes?" Samuel's voice was carefully neutral, but Catherine could hear the hope underneath. Her son was old enough to understand their precarious situation, old enough to lie awake worrying about what would happen when they lost the cabin. "I don't know yet," Catherine admitted. "It's complicated." "Because we'd have enough to eat?" Emma asked with the brutal honesty of children. "And I could have my own bed? And Samuel could go to real school?" "Those things matter, yes, but there are other things to consider too." "Like what?" Samuel challenged. "Mama, you work so hard. You're tired all the time. When was the last time you bought something for yourself? When was the last time you smiled and really meant it?" Catherine pulled back to look at her son's serious face. When had he gotten so perceptive? "Samuel, Mr. Thornhill seems nice," Emma offered. "He has kind eyes, and his friend Mr. McAllister was gentle when he carried your basket. Bad men aren't gentle. It's not that simple, babies. Marriage is serious. It's forever. And Mr. Thornhill and I barely know each other. Papa said you barely knew him when you got married," Samuel pointed out. "He said you met in April and married in June. That's only 2 months." Catherine felt the familiar ache of loss. Tom's death had left a hole in their lives that would never quite heal. "That's true, but your papa and I were both young, both from similar backgrounds. Mr. Thornhill is different, wealthy, important. People respect him." "People respect you too, Mama," Emma said loyally. "You're the best mama in the whole world." Catherine hugged them both tightly, her heart breaking and mending simultaneously. These children, who'd lost so much, who deserved so much better than what she could give them alone, they were the reason she'd consider James Thornhill's insane proposal. Not for herself, but for them. But was that enough? Was it fair to James to marry him primarily for her children's sake? Was it fair to her children to marry someone she didn't love, even if it meant security? And underneath all the practical considerations, one truth she barely dared acknowledge. James Thornhill had looked at her with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Not pity, not calculation, but genuine regard, as though she mattered as a person, not just as a problem to be solved. That meant something. She just wasn't sure what. "Come on," she said, standing and brushing off her skirt. "We have work to do, and I have thinking to do. 3 days to make the most important decision of my life. No pressure at all." Samuel grinned, the first real smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "You're going to say yes, Mama, I can tell." "We'll see," Catherine said, but in her heart she suspected her son might be right. The 3 days passed like an eternity for James. He threw himself into ranch work with unusual intensity, riding fence lines that didn't need checking, reorganizing the barn that was already organized, and generally making Bear shake his head in amused exasperation. "You're wearing a hole in the ground with all that pacing," Bear observed on the evening of the second day. They sat on the ranch house porch, watching the sun set over the mountains in spectacular shades of orange and purple. I'm not pacing. You've walked past that same fence post 12 times in the last hour. That's pacing. Bear packed his pipe with tobacco. You really think she'll say yes? I don't know. James leaned against the porch railing. She should say no. It's the sensible choice, but I'm hoping she's just desperate enough and just brave enough to take the risk. And if she says no, then I'll respect her decision and find another way to help her. Maybe buy the land through a third party, arrange it so she doesn't know it's me, something. Bear lit his pipe, the sweet smoke drifting into the evening air. You've got it bad, boss. I've got what bad? You know what? You're halfway in love with her already, and you've barely spent 2 hours in her company. James started to deny it, then stopped. Was Bear right? He'd thought this was about respect, about admiration for her character, about wanting something authentic rather than the hollow glamour of society life. But maybe it was more than that. Maybe in Catherine's quiet strength and stubborn dignity, he'd glimpsed something he'd been searching for without knowing it. A true partner, someone who understood struggle and sacrifice, someone who valued substance over appearance. If I am, James said slowly, it doesn't change anything. She deserves the space to make her own choice without feeling pressured by my feelings. Noble of you, Bear puffed on his pipe. But feelings have a way of complicating things, whether we acknowledge them or not. Meanwhile, at the Brennan homestead, Catherine was having her own reckoning. She'd spent 3 days going through every possible scenario, weighing every consequence, examining her motives and James's from every angle. The practical arguments were straightforward. Marriage to James would solve her immediate problems. No more foreclosure, no more wondering how to feed her children, no more exhausting work that barely kept them afloat. Samuel could attend school, maybe even go to college someday. Emma could have proper clothes, medical care when needed, the security of knowing she'd never go to bed hungry. But Catherine had never been comfortable taking the easy way out, and marriage to James would definitely be the easy way. It felt too much like giving up, like admitting she couldn't manage on her own. Her entire adult life had been defined by resilience and independence. Could she really surrender that to become dependent on a man she barely knew? Then again, was stubbornness worth more than her children's future? Was pride worth more than Samuel's dreams of becoming a lawyer or Emma's chances of receiving an education? When did determination cross the line into foolish martyrdom? You're thinking too hard. Again, Mama, Samuel said on the morning of the 3rd day. He sat at the table practicing his letters while Emma helped Catherine fold laundry. Some decisions require hard thinking, Catherine replied. Papa used to say that when you overthink something, you miss what your heart already knows. Catherine smiled sadly at her son's wisdom. Tom had indeed said that, usually right before making some impulsive decision that didn't always work out. But sometimes his impulsiveness had been exactly right, like when he'd proposed to Catherine after knowing her for only 6 weeks, or when he decided to head west to Montana Territory despite having no idea what they'd find. What would Tom think about James Thornhill's proposal? The question had haunted Catherine for 3 days. Would Tom want her to remarry? Would he approve of James? Would he think she was betraying his memory? But she knew, deep down, what Tom would say. He'd want his children cared for. He'd want Catherine to find happiness again. Tom had loved life too much, had been too generous of spirit to want his family trapped in poverty and grief after his death. I've made my decision, Catherine said quietly. Both children looked up, Emma's eyes wide, Samuel's carefully neutral despite the tension in his small shoulders. I'm going to say yes. Emma let out a squeal of delight and threw her arms around Catherine's waist. Samuel's careful neutrality cracked into a grin that made him look young again, like a boy instead of the too serious little man he'd become since his father's death. But, Catherine said firmly, gently extricating herself from Emma's embrace, we need to be clear about what this means. Mr. Thornhill and I are entering a practical arrangement, not a love match. We'll be partners, helping each other, but we're not, that is, he and I aren't. You're not in love, Samuel finished for her. We understand, Mama, but maybe someday you could be. Catherine couldn't answer that question. Instead, she pulled both children close. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, I promise you this, I will always put you first, always. Mr. Thornhill understands that. He respects it. That's part of why I'm saying yes. And because he has kind eyes, Emma added seriously. That's important too. Catherine laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine warmth. When had she last laughed like that? Yes, sweetheart. Because he has kind eyes. The supply wagon arrived at noon. The driver, an older man named Pete Harrison, accepted Catherine's sealed letter with a knowing look. "Heard there's been some excitement involving you and Mr. Thornhill," Pete said, not unkindly. "Town's buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest." "I imagine it is." Catherine handed him an extra coin. "Please deliver this directly to Mr. Thornhill at the Rocking Tea. Don't give it to anyone else." "Yes, ma'am. And for what it's worth, I think Mr. Thornhill's a good man, decent and fair. Can't say the same for some of those society folks causing trouble." After Pete left, Catherine forced herself to go about normal chores, though normal was impossible. She'd just agreed to marry a man she barely knew, to uproot her entire life, to step into a world where she'd be watched, judged, and resented. The magnitude of the decision hit her in waves. Exhilaration, terror, hope, doubt, all tumbling over each other. James received the letter at 3 o'clock. Bear brought it to him in the office where James was supposedly working on accounts, but was actually staring into space. "Supply wagon just came through," Bear said, handing over the envelope. "Driver said it was from Mrs. Brennan to be delivered directly to you." James's hands were steady as he opened the envelope, though his heart hammered in his chest. The letter was brief, written in neat, precise handwriting. "Mr. Thornhill, I accept your proposal, with the following conditions. First, I will not be rushed into marriage. I need at least 2 weeks to prepare myself and my children, to arrange our affairs, and to be certain of my decision. Second, I want a legal agreement drawn up specifying that if our marriage doesn't work, if either of us becomes unhappy or regrets the arrangement, we can dissolve it without blame or recrimination. I won't trap you, and I won't be trapped. Third, my children must always come first. Their well-being, their happiness, their future. These are my primary concerns. If you cannot accept that, I'd rather face foreclosure. Fourth, I want to contribute to the household. I'm not comfortable being purely dependent. I'll need useful work, something that gives me purpose beyond being your wife in name. If these conditions are acceptable, I will marry you. Sincerely, Catherine Brennan." James read the letter 3 times, a smile growing with each reading. Even in accepting his proposal, Catherine maintained her independence, her dignity, her fierce protectiveness of her children. She was negotiating terms like a business partner, rather than swooning like a society woman who'd landed a wealthy husband. It was perfect. "She said yes," he told Bear, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. "I can see that. You're grinning like a fool." She also laid down conditions. She wants a legal agreement, time to prepare, assurance that her children come first, and meaningful work at the ranch. Bear whistled. "She's got grit. I'll give her that." Most women would just say yes and count their blessings. Most women aren't Catherine Brennan. James folded the letter carefully. "Get the wagon ready. We're going to town. Now? It's nearly 4 o'clock. Now. I need to see a lawyer, a banker, and a minister. Might as well get the gossip mill working in overdrive." The ride to Silver Ridge took an hour. James spent it composing his response to Catherine's conditions, all acceptable, every one of them, and steeling himself for the reaction his news would provoke. The reaction was immediate and explosive. James's first stop was the law office of Samuel Porter, one of the few lawyers in town who wasn't in Judge Langston's pocket. Porter was a methodical man in his 60s, semi-retired, but still maintaining a small practice. "Mr. Thornhill, good afternoon," Porter greeted him. "What brings you by?" "I need a marriage contract drawn up, something that specifies terms and includes provisions for dissolution if necessary." Porter's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual. Most folks just go with standard vows." "This isn't a standard situation," James explained briefly, watching Porter's expression shift from curiosity to surprise to something like respect. "You're asking me to draw up terms for marrying Catherine Brennan, the widow everyone's talking about?" "I am." "Can you do it?" Porter leaned back in his chair, studying James carefully. "I can, but you should know that Judge Langston has been making noise about you, spreading rumors about Mrs. Brennan being a schemer, suggesting you've been compromised somehow. If you go through with this marriage, Langston and his allies will make life difficult. Let them try. They've already started. Colonel Sutherland has cancelled the Fort Harrison contract. Henry Blackwood is lobbying to have you removed from the Cattlemen's Association, and I've heard whispers about banking difficulties, pressure on anyone who does business with you." James felt anger flare, but kept his voice level. "They're punishing me for refusing to play their game, for not marrying one of their daughters and strengthening their little empire of influence." "Exactly. And if you marry Mrs. Brennan, you'll be declaring outright war." Porter paused. Is she worth it? She is. And more importantly, they don't get to dictate my life. I didn't come to Montana to be controlled by anyone. Porter smiled, the first genuine warmth he'd shown. In that case, Mr. Thornhill, I'll be honored to draw up your contract. Give me until tomorrow morning. From Porter's office, James went directly to the bank. Milton Cartwright's coolness had progressed to open hostility. Mr. Thornhill, I'm surprised to see you here. I'm sure you are. I'm here to pay off the Brennan note in full. Cartwright's face reddened. That note isn't yours to pay. It will be. I'm marrying Mrs. Brennan in 2 weeks. As her husband, I'll assume responsibility for her debts, but I'd prefer to pay them now before the wedding to avoid any appearance of impropriety. I'm afraid that's not possible. As I mentioned previously, we have another buyer interested in the property after foreclosure. Then I'll pay double what they're offering. James placed a bank draft on Cartwright's desk. That should more than cover the outstanding note and any fees. I'll also be moving my business accounts to the bank in Helena, effective immediately. I can't in good conscience continue doing business with an institution that treats struggling widows so callously. Cartwright's face went from red to white. James's accounts represented significant deposits and regular transactions. Losing them would hurt the bank's quarterly numbers and might raise questions from the board of directors. Mr. Thornhill, there's no need for hasty decisions. Perhaps we can work something out. No, we can't. James stood. I'll expect the deed to the Brennan property delivered to Samuel Porter's office by tomorrow afternoon. Good day, Mr. Cartwright. Word of James's actions spread through Silver Ridge like wildfire. By the time he reached the church to speak with Reverend Mitchell about performing the ceremony, a small crowd had gathered in the street, whispering and pointing. Reverend Mitchell, a kind-faced man in his 50s who'd always treated everyone in his congregation equally regardless of wealth or status, listened to James's request with thoughtful attention. A marriage in 2 weeks is quick, he observed. Are you certain about this, James? As certain as I've ever been about anything, Reverend. And Mrs. Brennan, she's agreeable. She is. Then I'll be happy to perform the ceremony, but I feel obligated to warn you, there will be opposition, strong opposition from some very powerful people. I know, I'm counting on you to stand firm. Mitchell smiled. I didn't become a minister to serve only the wealthy and powerful, son. Every person deserves dignity, respect, and the chance at happiness. If you and Mrs. Brennan have found that together, I'll not let anyone prevent your union. As James left the church, he found Judge Langston waiting on the street, backed by Colonel Sutherland and Henry Blackwood. A crowd had gathered to watch the confrontation. Thornhill, Langston said coldly, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Judge. Then listen. You're making a catastrophic mistake. This woman is going to be my wife. Speak carefully about her, Judge, very carefully. Langston's face purpled with rage. You arrogant young fool. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? My daughter would have made you an excellent wife. The Sutherland girl, the Blackwood girl, any of them would have been suitable matches. Instead, you choose a nobody, a penniless widow of questionable morals, who's clearly manipulated you into this insanity. Catherine Brennan has more character in her little finger than your daughter and her friends have in their entire bodies, James said, his voice dangerously quiet. She's honest, hard-working, and genuine, qualities sadly lacking in so-called respectable society. She's poor, Blackwood interjected. She's desperate. She's using you. No, she's surviving against odds that would have broken most people. She's protecting her children. She's doing what she has to do with dignity and strength. That's not manipulation. That's courage. Colonel Sutherland stepped forward, his military bearing imposing. Mr. Thornhill, as a friend and business associate, I'm asking you one final time to reconsider. Cancel this engagement. Distance yourself from Mrs. Brennan. Restore your reputation and standing. If you do, we'll forget this unfortunate episode. And if I don't, then you'll find yourself isolated. No contracts, no business relationships, no social acceptance. We'll ensure that every respectable person in the territory knows you've allied yourself with unsuitable elements. James looked at each of them in turn. These men who'd tried to control him, manipulate him, force him into their vision of what his life should be. He felt no fear, only a strange sense of liberation. Do your worst, gentlemen. I've built the rocking tea once. If necessary, I'll build it again. But I'll do it on my own terms, with a partner I respect, free from your control and your expectations. He turned to the watching crowd. Let me be clear so there's no confusion. In 2 weeks, I'm marrying Catherine Brennan. Anyone who has a problem with that can take their business elsewhere. Anyone who spreads lies about my future wife will answer to me personally, and anyone who's been pressured to turn against me or Mrs. Brennan has my understanding and no hard feelings." Then he mounted his horse and rode out of town, leaving shock and chaos in his wake. Bear was waiting at the edge of town. "That went well," he said dryly. "About as expected. You just declared war on the most powerful men in the territory." "I know. They'll come after you hard. Economic, social pressure, maybe even legal troubles if Langston gets creative." "I know that too." Bear was quiet for a moment as they rode toward the Brennan homestead. Finally, he said, "I'm with you, boss. Whatever comes, you're doing the right thing." "Thanks, Bear. That means more than you know." They reached the Brennan homestead just before sunset. Catherine was waiting on the porch, having clearly seen them approach. Her face was pale but composed. James dismounted and walked to the porch, holding her letter. "I accept all your conditions, every single one. Mr. Porter is drawing up the legal agreement tonight. I've paid off your bank note, and Reverend Mitchell will perform the ceremony 2 weeks from Saturday." Catherine's composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You didn't have to pay the note. I would have handled it after the wedding. I wanted you to know you're not dependent on marrying me. If you change your mind tomorrow, you still have the land free and clear. You have options, Catherine. You're choosing this, not being forced into it." "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding, for respecting your independence, your dignity, your need to make your own choices." James smiled gently. "Catherine, those are the things I admire most about you. I'd be a fool to try to take them away." Samuel and Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of voices. Emma ran to her mother's side, while Samuel maintained his more cautious distance. "Is it true?" Samuel asked. "Are you really going to marry Mama? If she'll still have me after she hears what happened in town today." James briefly explained his confrontations with the judge, the colonel, and Blackwood, watching Catherine's expression shift from concern to disbelief to something that might have been reluctant admiration. "You confronted all of them. Publicly." Catherine shook her head. "James, they'll destroy you." It was the first time she'd used his given name. He noticed, and it warmed something in his chest. "They'll try. We'll see how that works out for them." He crouched down to Samuel and Emma's level. "I want you both to understand something. Your mother is marrying me to give you a better life, to give you opportunities and security. But I'm not just marrying your mother. I'm choosing to become part of your family. That means I'll do my best to be someone you can count on, someone worthy of your trust. I can't replace your father, and I won't try. But I hope we can become friends." Emma studied him with her serious 6-year-old gaze. "Will we really have enough to eat? Every day?" The question broke James's heart a little. "Every day, I promise." "And can I go to school?" Samuel asked, trying to sound casual but failing to hide his desperate hope. "You can go to the best school in the territory. Maybe eventually to college back east if that's what you want." "Can I have a puppy?" Emma asked, then looked embarrassed at her own boldness. James laughed. "You can have 2 puppies if you want." Catherine wiped her eyes. "Emma, Samuel, go inside and start getting ready for bed. I need to talk to Mr. Thornhill, to James, for a few more minutes." After the children disappeared, Catherine turned to James with naked vulnerability in her eyes. "I'm terrified of this decision, of marrying you, of entering a world where I don't belong, of failing you, of discovering you regret this choice, of 100 things I can't even name. I'm terrified too," James admitted, "of letting you down, of not being what you need, of moving too fast and making you uncomfortable, of not protecting you and the children from the backlash that's coming. Then we're both terrified together. That's something, at least." Catherine managed a watery smile. "How do we do this, James? How do we build a marriage from what? Mutual respect and shared fear. Honestly, patiently, one day at a time." James took her hand carefully, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. "Catherine, I can't promise you romance or grand passion. I can't promise our marriage will evolve into something deeper than partnership. But I can promise you honesty, respect, and my absolute commitment to your well-being and your children's happiness." "Is that enough to start with?" "It's more than I had yesterday," Catherine said softly. "It's more than I dared hope for. So yes, James, it's enough." The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and escalating tension. James brought Catherine and the children to the rocking tea, installing them in guest rooms while the ranch hands worked to prepare a larger family space. The ranch hands, to James's relief, welcomed Catherine and the children warmly. They were working men who understood hardship and respected anyone willing to work hard and deal honestly. Catherine threw herself into ranch life with determined energy. She took over the ranch kitchen, which had been managed indifferently by the seasonal cook. She mended clothes, organized supplies, and insisted on earning her place rather than being treated as a guest. The cowboys quickly learned that Mrs. Brennan made the best biscuits in Montana Territory and could patch any torn shirt like new. Samuel and Emma blossomed like flowers in spring. Freed from constant worry about food and security, they revealed personalities that had been suppressed by stress. Samuel devoured every book in James's extensive library. Emma adopted half a dozen ranch animals and appointed herself their personal veterinarian. The social backlash was severe. Judge Langston filed a legal challenge to the marriage, claiming James was mentally unfit due to uncharacteristic behavior and poor judgment. The challenge was quickly dismissed by the territorial judge in Helena, who was not under Langston's influence, but the attempt sent a clear message. Colonel Sutherland made good on his threat about the Fort Harrison contract. However, 3 smaller fort commanders, hearing about what Sutherland had done and why, immediately offered James contracts for their garrisons. James ended up with more military business than before, not less. Henry Blackwood's attempt to have James removed from the Cattlemen's Association backfired spectacularly. When Blackwood presented his motion at the monthly meeting, fully a third of the ranchers walked out in protest, stating that they'd rather form a new association than be part of one that punished members for marrying whomever they chose. Blackwood withdrew his motion, but the damage to his influence was permanent. The social ostracism was real, but less effective than Langston's faction hoped. Respectable society closed ranks, but James discovered he didn't much like respectable society anyway. The people he actually respected, working ranchers, honest businessmen, decent families, quietly expressed support, or at least neutrality. And through it all, Catherine and James developed a genuine friendship. They talked late into the evenings about everything and nothing, their pasts, their hopes, their fears, their opinions on politics and philosophy, and the price of cattle. They learned each other's habits and preferences. They discovered shared values and complementary strengths. The attraction was there too, undeniable, but carefully managed. James found himself noticing the graceful way Catherine moved, the intelligence in her eyes, the sound of her rare laughter. Catherine caught herself watching James work, admiring his competence and strength, feeling safe in his presence in a way she hadn't felt safe in years. But both of them held back, honoring their agreement about expectations and independence. The wedding day arrived on a Saturday morning in early November. Light snow had fallen overnight, dusting the ranch and the mountains beyond with white. Reverend Mitchell arrived early, along with Samuel Porter, to witness the signing of the marriage contract and the regular marriage certificate. Catherine wore a simple dress of blue wool that James had commissioned from the seamstress in Helena, nothing fancy but well-made and flattering. Her hair was arranged in a simple style, and she wore no jewelry except a silver locket containing a photograph of her late husband, Tom. James had insisted she keep it, had been glad to see her honor that memory. James wore his best suit, though he felt oddly constrained by the formal clothing. Bear stood as his witness, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. Emma and Samuel, scrubbed and dressed in new clothes that actually fit, watched the proceedings with solemn excitement. The ceremony was brief and simple, held in the ranch house parlor with only the necessary participants present. Catherine's voice shook slightly when she made her vows. James's hand was steady when he placed the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "By the power vested in me by Montana Territory and the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Mitchell said. "James, you may kiss your bride." James and Catherine looked at each other, both suddenly awkward. They'd agreed no expectations, no pressure, but this was a wedding and some things were traditional. James leaned forward and kissed Catherine's cheek gently, chastely. She turned her head at the last second, and their lips brushed in a brief accidental kiss that sent unexpected warmth through both of them. Bear whooped, breaking the tension. Emma giggled. Samuel grinned. And just like that, they were married. The small celebration that followed was warm and genuine. The ranch hands took turns congratulating the newlyweds and making Emma and Samuel feel welcome. Cookie, the ranch cook, who'd been happily relieved of his duties by Catherine, presented a wedding cake he'd somehow managed to make without burning. As the sun set and the festivities wound down, James and Catherine found themselves alone on the porch, wrapped in coats against the November cold. "Well," Catherine said, "we did it." "We did." James glanced at her. Any regrets? Ask me again in a year. She smiled to take the sting from the words. I'm terrified of disappointing you. You couldn't if you tried. Catherine, you've transformed this place in 2 weeks. The house feels like a home. The men are happier. Samuel and Emma are thriving. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing. What's that? Purpose beyond just accumulating wealth. Family. Connection. James paused, choosing his words carefully. I know we agreed this was practical, not romantic, but I need you to know, I'm glad I married you, not because it solved problems or made business sense, because you're extraordinary, and I'm honored that you took a chance on me. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. James, you don't have to say anything back. I'm not asking for declarations. I just wanted you to know. But Catherine shook her head. You should know something too. When Tom died, I thought I'd never feel anything for anyone again, beyond duty and affection for my children. I thought that part of my life was over. But these past 2 weeks, getting to know you, seeing how you treat my children, watching you stand up to those terrible men on my behalf, I've felt something stirring. I don't know what it is yet. Maybe it's just gratitude, or maybe it's the beginning of something more. But I'm not sorry we married. I'm hopeful, and hope is something I haven't felt in a very long time. James reached for her hand, and this time when he held it, the gesture felt less like a formality and more like the beginning of something real. They stood together on the porch as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Two people who'd started as strangers, become partners by necessity, and were discovering they might become something more by choice. Inside, Emma and Samuel were settling into their new rooms, real rooms with real beds and warm blankets, and the security of knowing tomorrow would bring enough food and no worries. Bear was organizing the ranch hands for the evening chores, grinning at the knowledge that his boss had finally found what he'd been searching for. And in Silver Ridge, Judge Langston and his allies nursed their wounded pride and plotted their next moves, unaware that they'd already lost the only battle that truly mattered. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Catherine woke early to find James already up, standing by the window of their bedroom. They'd moved into shared quarters after 3 months, a development that had happened naturally, without pressure or awkwardness, when both of them admitted they'd rather be together than apart. What are you thinking about? She asked, joining him at the window. About how different my life is from what I imagined. James put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. A year ago, I was the most eligible bachelor in Montana, being chased by society women I had nothing in common with. Now I'm married to a former poor widow, helping raise 2 children who aren't mine by blood but feel like mine by choice, and fighting a low-grade social war with some of the territory's most powerful men. Regretting your choices? Not for a second. James turned to face her fully. Catherine, I need to tell you something. That sounds ominous. It's not. It's just, I've been holding back, being careful, trying to honor our agreement about expectations and independence. But I can't anymore. I'm in love with you. Completely, deeply, embarrassingly in love with you. I have been for months, I think. Maybe from the very beginning. Catherine felt her heart race. James, you don't have to say it back. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. I'm tired of pretending this is just a practical arrangement. For me, it stopped being practical the day I watched you stand up to Judge Langston in that ballroom, refusing to be made small by their cruelty. It stopped being practical when I saw how you love your children. It stopped being practical when we stayed up all night talking about your dreams for the future, and I realized I wanted to be part of making those dreams come true. Catherine smiled, tears streaming down her face. You're an idiot. I what? You're an idiot if you think I don't love you too. I've been in love with you for months. Since the day you confronted those men in town for me, or maybe the day you spent 3 hours teaching Samuel about property law because he asked, or the day you built Emma that clinic for her rescued animals. I don't even know when it happened. I just know that somewhere between marrying you out of necessity and now, you became essential. You became home. James kissed her then, not carefully or chastely, but with all the love and passion they'd been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Catherine laughed. That rare, genuine laugh he'd grown to treasure. We're ridiculous, she said. 2 people so determined to be practical that we almost missed becoming something real. Speak for yourself. I knew we'd be something real from the moment you negotiated conditions for our marriage, like a business partner, instead of swooning over my wealth. They were still laughing when Emma and Samuel burst into the room, as they did most mornings, full of energy and questions and plans for the day. The children had taken to calling James Pa about 2 months into the marriage, a development that had made him tear up the first time he heard it. Life at the Rocking T had found its rhythm. Samuel was excelling at the school in Helena, where James had enrolled him, coming home on weekends full of stories about his studies. Emma's rescued animal collection had grown to include 2 puppies, a 3-legged cat, a crow with a damaged wing, and a baby deer she'd found abandoned. Catherine managed the ranch household with efficiency and warmth, earning respect from everyone who worked with her. And James discovered that prosperity felt infinitely better when shared with people he loved. The social ostracism from Silver Ridge's elite had mostly faded into irrelevance. Judge Langston had grudgingly accepted defeat after James won a significant legal case against one of Langston's cronies. Colonel Sutherland had been reassigned back east, and Henry Blackwood had suffered financial setbacks that diminished his influence considerably. But more importantly, James and Catherine had discovered they didn't need validation from society's upper echelons. They had each other. They had the children. They had the ranch and its community of workers who'd become friends. They had built something authentic and lasting. On an evening in late summer, almost a year after their marriage, James and Catherine sat on the porch watching the sunset, a daily ritual they'd maintained throughout their marriage. Samuel was inside reading. Emma was tending to her animals, and for this moment it was just the 2 of them. "Do you remember your conditions?" James asked. "The ones you wrote in your letter when you accepted my proposal?" "Of course. Why?" "I was thinking about the one about dissolving the marriage if either of us became unhappy. I want to formally tear up that part of the agreement." Catherine tensed slightly. "Why?" "Because I have no intention of ever dissolving this marriage. Because what we've built together is permanent, at least as far as I'm concerned. Because you're not just my wife in name anymore. You're my partner in everything, the person I trust most, the woman I love more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." James took her hand. "I'm all in, Catherine, completely committed, for life. No escape clauses, no conditions. Just us, together, forever." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, and James felt a flutter of worry. Had he pushed too hard? Did she still need that safety net? Then Catherine smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "I was going to bring up the same thing tonight. I don't want an escape clause either. I want this us permanently. I want to grow old with you, James Thornhill. I want to watch our children become adults and maybe have children of their own someday. I want a lifetime of sunsets on this porch and arguments about how to run the ranch and late-night conversations about everything and nothing. Our children? Samuel and Emma are as much yours now as they are mine. You've earned that. Tom would be grateful to you for loving them, for giving them opportunities he couldn't. And maybe someday," Catherine blushed slightly, "maybe someday there might be more children. If you want that." James pulled her close, his heart so full it hurt. "I want everything with you. All of it. The children we have and any children we might have. The good days and the hard days. The successes and the struggles. All of it. As long as it's with you." They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors. 2 people who'd started as strangers thrust together by circumstance, who'd built a partnership based on respect and necessity, and who'd discovered that sometimes the most practical decision could lead to the deepest love. In Silver Ridge, the gossips who'd predicted disaster for James Thornhill's marriage to the poor widow had fallen silent. The evidence was too clear to deny. The Rocking T prospered as never before. James Thornhill seemed happier and more grounded than anyone had ever seen him, and Catherine had proven herself to be exactly what James had claimed, a woman of remarkable character and strength. Those who'd pursued James so aggressively had long since moved on. Victoria Langston married a banker from Helena, a suitable match that pleased her father. Margaret Sutherland returned east with her family. The various daughters of judges and colonels and wealthy men found other wealthy men to marry, other alliances to cement. But none of them found what James and Catherine had found, a love built on honesty, respect, shared struggle, and the courage to choose authenticity over appearances. As darkness fell and stars emerged, James and Catherine finally went inside, hand in hand, to the home they'd built together, to the family they'd created, to the life neither of them had planned, but both of them had chosen. And in choosing each other, despite all odds, despite social pressure and practical obstacles and the expectations of others, they'd found something rare and precious, genuine happiness, hard-earned and deeply treasured. The story of the wealthy rancher, who spurned 100 daughters of judges and colonels to marry a poor widow, became legend in Montana Territory. Some told it as a cautionary tale about foolish choices and misplaced loyalty. But most told it as a love story, proof that true connection transcends wealth and status, that courage matters more than social standing, and that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that make no sense to anyone but the people making them. James and Catherine Thornhill lived long, happy lives at the rocking tea. Samuel became a lawyer, as he'd dreamed, fighting for justice for ordinary people who couldn't fight for themselves. Emma became one of Montana's first female veterinarians, known throughout the territory for her skill and compassion. And the Thornhill Ranch prospered under the partnership of two people who'd learned that the strongest foundations are built not on convenience or calculation, but on respect, trust, and love that grows slowly, honestly, and permanently. The end.